Hey guys, Paulo with Meditation Amsterdam. Today's video we're going to be talking about how and why the sense of me arises. And before I continue with the video, take the next 3 seconds to subscribe to the channel and click the like button because it makes me feel really good. There's no other reason really. Yeah, this is a really cool topic actually. This is something that I've been looking into in the past few days and weeks. And I thought I would share a little diagram as usual in which we explore how the sense of me arises. So it begins really with a kind of singularity or a unified field of consciousness in which when we are born, we are in this bubble of perception. And some dominant features of that perception is sight, so we can see, right? So we see all these sort of indistinct things, and we feel a lot of indistinct things as well. Apart from that, of course, we taste, we smell, and so on. We hear. Hear is another big one, right? So we listen, hear. And maybe there's a little bit of proto-thinking going on, but maybe not that much. There's not a lot of computation going on yet. So what's interesting about this state is that it's complete, it's whole. There's no divisions or distinctions in it, to the point where the newly born doesn't even distinguish itself from mother. To it, there is just one single bubble of perception of which he and mother are a unified part of. And but something very interesting starts to happen soon thereafter, and I'm gonna put that on silent. And that is that in this indistinct and complete bubble of perception, a rift occurs. Right? So you are this indistinct bubble of perception to start with, but then soon enough you start to notice that some of those perceptions are positive perceptions. Good. Positive. Yeah. In other words, mother warmth, for example, lactating, being tucked into your favorite blanket or whatever. And also negative perceptions arise. Negative. Yeah. Something along these lines. So, and you start to notice these, right? And by virtue of the fact that you are a totally defenseless little individual, or you can't really do much about them, but a mechanism begins to form in the mind, and that mechanism begins to sort out the good from the bad, and very quickly a rift occurs. That rift is separating what we say, this I want, and this I do not want. Now you may not be thinking that, right? It's a purely reactive, guttural, sensory reaction. But the organism will start to veer towards things that it wants and away from things that it doesn't want, just naturally, just reactively, instinctively. And so let's take then this mechanism here, the goodie, the baddie, and the getting away or towards these things. So we're going to paint yet another here. This is now a timeline, like so. Okay. Over here we have the good. Over here we have the bad. And this timeline will show us two things. So as time goes by, things fluctuate between good and bad. Yeah. So you have some good things, some bad things going like this. Every now and then you'll have some particularly unpleasant thing. Yeah, that'll become important later. And you know, the good can also sometimes be pretty good. And on you go like this. Good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Now, there's a couple of things going on here. What you see is that, now we're going to use our blue element here. Whenever the experience is anything other than perfectly neutral, in other words, not triggering any particular good or bad judgment, let's call it a proto-judgment on your part. Whenever it's totally neutral, nothing is really happening. But as soon as something good or bad is happening, a reaction takes place. Reaction takes place. Reaction takes place. Right? In each of those. And the reactions that take place on the positive side of the spectrum, we're going to call craving. Craving. So these make you crave. And the ones that take part on the negative part of the spectrum we call aversion. Right? So you want to get away from these. Aversion. And there's particular events such as this one, which is particularly negative, and this will cause something a little bit different, which we will call trauma. Trauma. Now, notice that particularly negative doesn't have to be bad in the objective sense of the word. It just needs to make a very big impression of unpleasantness and disempowerment combined, against which the organism wants to protect itself. Now, something interesting then happens, which is that you have here, you know, with each of these blue dots, suddenly, I will draw the rest of them. So you have one here, you have another one here, another one here. No, and here. There we go. What happens if we remove from this picture the events themselves and we look at the craving and the aversion responses? What you will notice is that this begins to create a fairly constant movement of the mind, either towards wanting or towards rejecting things. And that very frequency or that very continuity of seeking for the next best thing or rejecting whatever is happening that we don't like begins to crystallize. And what we mean by crystallize is that what is in essence a process or a reaction starts to be perceived as an entity in its own right. In other words, what used to be a mechanism of choosing good and rejecting evil, because of its continuity of constantly I want, I don't want, I want, I don't want, that continuity becomes reified. And by reification we means something that is a process starts to be misperceived as an entity. Okay. So this whole thing starts to be in the mind's eye. This becomes somebody, And the name that we give somebody, that entire mechanism is the famous me. Yep. Now, the mechanism is very crude and very basic in a small infant. But as time develops, an entire personality grows out of the necessity of this organism to feel like it can control the flow of goodie and baddie that is perceived. In other words, an entire personality and an entire library or repertoire of attitudes and beliefs and things that we want to learn and actions that we want to take. An entire personality, an entire person grows out of the need to get closer to the things we crave and get away from the things that we do not want. And it's not only the frequency of the craving and aversion that creates the illusion of an entity, but it is also the depth of some of these aversions. In other words, trauma makes the organism very, very protective and very defensive. We definitely don't want to feel this again. And we develop an entire defense mechanism in the form of attitudes, beliefs, and tactics to make sure that the organism is not exposed to this level of discomfort ever again. Now, so I'm following a little bit of a script here because I wanted this message to be as clear as possible. Now, let's then. So having explained this, we can then realize a couple of things. One of them is that this mechanism of ego development is actually perfectly natural, right? There's nothing evil there's nothing evil about the ego in itself. It's a process, and it gets created by a developmental process because the organism wants to get towards what feels good and away from what feels bad. There's nothing inherently evil about that. However, what it does do is it creates a very lopsided individual. So if we round this out a little bit, assuming this is a head now, right? So this individual is going to be, a rather confused entity, and it's going to be neurotic because it is constantly going to be trying to get to the goodie. To keep the balance of events and perceptions towards the good, and it's going to be looking at this stuff, the bad, and it's going to go, I don't really want that, and that the mechanism believes that it can optimize for pleasure, essentially, that it can optimize for positive and pleasurable perceptions. What that mechanism doesn't know about itself, because it can't, it's a mechanism, is that it is a purely defensive and robotic mechanism. It doesn't know if you remember the goodie and the baddie, it doesn't know that there's a neutrality that could be regained, and that in regaining that neutrality, the split that was created, if you remember, so there was the initial bubble that I painted was a bubble in which there were good and bad events, and there was a split. But before the bubble was split between good and bad, the bubble was complete. In other words, there was just completeness there. Now, that's the completeness that we long for. So we long not so much for everlasting pleasure, but we long for that sense of single-mindedness and a unification of our perception and our consciousness. What this mechanism doesn't know is that so long as it is shunning the discomfort and chasing for comfort, it can never be whole again, because discomfort is an integral part of this unification that we are longing to achieve. Something that came to mind when I was sort of outlining this whole story was the story of Adam and Eve and and this is not my idea, by the way. It's simply a way to color this a little bit further. If anyone who's read the Bible or heard about the story of Adam and Eve, so the snake comes to Eve and offers her to eat the apple. And the apple is a forbidden fruit. So God has forbidden Adam and Eve to eat the apple because the apple is the fruit of the tree of good and evil, right? So what it means as a metaphor is the moment that you are in paradise when you are whole, but the moment you eat of the tree offered by the snake, you split yourself because you are an entity, or you believe yourself to be an entity that is chasing good and rejecting displeasure or discomfort, and that distinction splits you. It splits your psyche, and the mechanism of choosing becomes an entity in its own right, which you call me. So the ego is this mechanism that goes around choosing all the time. Because of the frequency, like we said, it's very convincing. So it's very easy to mistake a process for a thing. For example, a wave or a whirlpool in the water, we tend to think it's a thing, but really it's a movement. The particles of water move up and down, but the wave looks like it's going left to right, for example, right? So we've confused it. We have reified a process and called it a thing. Same goes for the me. The me is a choosing mechanism between good and bad, but it happens so often that we reify it and we start to believe that it's an actual entity, right? Not a particularly happy entity, that entity. And the other thing that happens, of course, is trauma, which is inevitable. It's almost an inevitable part of development. And this me promises that so long as we keep it around, that so long as we keep choosing and trying to control, chasing pleasure and rejecting discomfort, that as long as we keep around that mechanism and we keep doing that, it promises that we don't have to feel that trauma anymore, right? That particularly big low that we felt at some point. Separation from mother is by the way, the classic trauma of separation. But this thing says, don't worry, I'll take care of you. That will never happen again so long as we keep neurotically choosing between the good and the bad. It's absolutely not true, right? You can't. Not only that, but failure to re-experience that trauma keeps you stuck in the choosing. So hope that analogy and that story makes sense. I might be making videos later about how we get out of that pickle altogether. Once again, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the channel, and if you enjoy the content, then do so, and I'll be back with more. Cheerio.